The snow had stopped falling when Jacob raised his hand and pointed toward the horizon. We all stopped walking, our breath rising in clouds, our bodies trembling from exhaustion and cold. Through the white expanse that stretched endlessly in every direction, through the pale light of the winter sun that gave no warmth, we saw it. A thin column of smoke rising into the sky, gray against white against blue, steady, unwavering, a sign of life where we had seen nothing but death for 7 days. My name is Daniel, and I was there that morning when hope returned. I was the city man among them, the physician who had joined the wagon train west with medical supplies and foolish dreams of frontier practice. I had meant to bring healing. Instead, I had watched people die of cold and hunger and despair as we wandered lost through the endless winter. If stories of survival and the unexpected grace found in desperate times speak to you, please subscribe. These tales from history's frozen edges need to be remembered, and your support keeps them alive. The smoke meant people, fire, shelter, food, perhaps. But more than that, it meant we might not die alone in this white wasteland. We had been lost for a week, separated from the main wagon train during a blizzard, our guide dead from fever, our supplies dwindling to nothing. 23 of us had started this journey. 14 remained, and each day I saw the light fading from more eyes. But now, that column of smoke, that impossible gift, that thread of hope pulling us forward through the snow that reached to our knees, that dragged at our legs like hands pulling us down into the white grave we all feared. What I didn't know then was that the smoke would lead us not just to survival, but to a truth I had traveled 3,000 miles to learn without knowing I was searching for it. Captain Henry stood beside Jacob, his weathered face studying the smoke with eyes that had seen too much loss. At 55, he was the oldest among us and our natural leader after our guide had died. He was a man of few words, but every word carried the weight of years spent on this frontier. "How far?" he asked Jacob, his voice rough from days of shouting orders through blizzards. Jacob was young, barely 22, but he had grown up on the frontier and could read the land like city men read newspapers. He squinted at the smoke, measuring distances I couldn't begin to calculate. 4 miles, maybe 5. Hard to say in this light. He looked back at our ragged group. "We can make it by nightfall if we move steady. And if it's abandoned?" That was Margaret, standing with her arm around her daughter Ruth. Margaret had buried her husband 3 days ago, leaving his frozen body wrapped in blankets beneath a cairn of stones we had barely the strength to pile. But she hadn't broken. She kept moving, kept her daughter moving, kept the rest of us moving by her example. "Then we use whatever shelter is there," Captain Henry decided. "But smoke means fire. Fire means someone tending it. We'll find help." I heard the doubt in his voice even if others didn't. I had learned to hear the spaces between words, the truths people tried to hide. As a physician, that skill had served me well. Out here, it was both blessing and curse. We formed our line again, Captain Henry at the front with Jacob, Margaret and Ruth behind them. Then came Thomas and his son, Michael, a boy of 10 who had somehow maintained his spirit despite watching his mother die in childbirth 2 weeks ago. Behind them, old Samuel, not old in years but aged by hardship, a former slave who had come west seeking the freedom the law promised but practice often denied. And beside him, Anna, a young Swedish woman whose husband had died in the blizzard that separated us from the main train. I brought up the rear with Peter, a blacksmith whose hands were still bandaged from frostbite, and Eleanor, a widow of 60 who moved with a determination that shamed younger people who complained. We were the remnants, the survivors, the ones who hadn't yet given up. The snow crunched beneath our feet as we walked. The sun moved across the sky but gave no warmth. The smoke stayed ahead of us, our beacon, our promise. With each step, I felt strength returning that I didn't know I still possessed. Hope is a powerful medicine. After an hour of walking, Captain Henry raised his hand again. We stopped. He wasn't looking at the smoke now. He was looking at something in the snow ahead. Tracks. Someone came this way recently, Jacob confirmed, kneeling to examine them. Several someones, following a trail we can't see, but they clearly can. The people from the smoke? Margaret asked. Maybe, or hunters from wherever that smoke is rising. Jacob stood, brushing snow from his knees. Either way, we follow. The tracks are fresh. Made this morning, I'd say. What we didn't know then was that we were being watched. Had been watched since we first spotted the smoke. And a decision was being made about us, about whether we were worth saving, or whether the winter should be allowed to take us as it had taken so many others. We followed the tracks as they wound through the landscape, and I began to notice things I had been too exhausted to see before. The way the snow here was less deep in certain places, as if people had walked these paths so often that even fresh snow couldn't fully cover the trails. The way certain trees had marks on them, subtle cuts and shapes that meant nothing to me but might mean everything to someone who could read them. This was inhabited land, not empty wilderness. We were walking through someone's home, and we were the strangers here. Young Ruth was the first to see them. She had been quiet since her father's death, speaking only in whispers to her mother. But now she let out a small gasp and pointed to our left. 3 figures stood among the trees, silent, watching. They wore furs and skins in patterns I had never seen, their faces partially hidden by hoods lined with what looked like fox fur. They didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Captain Henry raised his hand slowly, palm out, the universal gesture of peace. "We mean no harm," he called out, his voice carrying across the snow. "We're lost, separated from our train. We saw your smoke." The figures didn't respond, didn't move. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then one of them, the tallest, raised a hand in what might have been acknowledgement, or might have been dismissal. They turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees with a silence that seemed impossible for people moving through snow. "Should we follow?" Jacob asked quietly. "I don't think we have a choice," Captain Henry replied. "They know we're here now, and that smoke is still our only hope." We continued walking, but the mood had changed. We were no longer simply following smoke toward unknown help. We were entering someone's territory, someone who had watched us, evaluated us, and chosen not to help directly, but also not to turn us away. The smoke grew closer as the afternoon wore on. We could see now that it rose from beyond a ridge, sheltered in what looked like a natural depression in the land. Smart placement, protected from wind, hidden from view until you were almost upon it. As we climbed the ridge, exhaustion and hunger making each step a battle, I heard something that stopped me cold. Music, not imagined, not a trick of wind and tiredness. Real music, voices singing in harmony, a language I didn't recognize but a melody that spoke of home and warmth and community. We crested the ridge and saw the village below. It wasn't large. Perhaps 20 structures built low to the ground, designed to shed wind and snow. Smoke rose from several of them, and between the buildings I could see people moving. Children playing, dogs running. Life continuing in the middle of this frozen wasteland that had nearly killed us. "My God," Margaret breathed. "They're thriving." That was the word that captured it. Not just surviving, thriving. These people weren't fighting the winter. They were living in it, with it, as naturally as we had lived in our towns and cities before coming west. Captain Henry started down the ridge, and we followed. As we approached, people emerged from the buildings, not aggressive, not welcoming, simply watching, assessing, deciding. An old man stepped forward. His face was weathered like old leather, his eyes sharp despite his age. He wore what looked like ceremonial furs, and when he raised his hand, everyone, both from his village and from our group, stopped moving. He studied us for a long moment, counted us with his eyes, saw our weakness, our desperation, our need. Then he spoke in accented but clear English. "You are far from your path." "Yes," Captain Henry agreed. "We got separated from our wagon train in a blizzard. We've been lost for 7 days." The old man nodded slowly. 7 days is long to survive without knowledge of these lands. You must be strong. He paused, then added, "Or very lucky." "We saw your smoke," Margaret said quietly. It gave us hope. The old man's expression softened slightly. "Hope is good, but hope alone doesn't keep you alive through winter." He looked at each of us again, his gaze lingering on Ruth, on young Michael, on our injuries and our exhaustion. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, become warmer. "My name is Anoki. This is my village. You may shelter here while we decide what to do with you." "We don't want to be a burden," Captain Henry began, but Anoki cut him off with a gesture. "Everything is a burden in winter. The question is whether you are a burden worth bearing." He smiled slightly. "Come, food first, talk later. The winter is patient. It will wait while we eat." We were led into the largest building, and the warmth hit us like a physical force. A fire burned in the center, vented through a clever opening in the roof. Furs and woven mats covered the floor. The space was clean, organized, comfortable despite its simplicity. Women brought us food. A thick soup that tasted of meat and roots and something else I couldn't identify but didn't care. It was hot. It was nourishing. It was the first real meal we had eaten in days. I watched Ruth eat with fierce concentration, watched young Michael's eyes close in pleasure at the warmth and sustenance, watched Eleanor weep quietly as feeling returned to her frozen limbs. No one spoke while we ate. That was the first lesson. Sometimes silence is more generous than words. Let people recover. Let them feel human again before asking them to think or talk or make decisions. When we had finished, when some color had returned to faces that had been gray with cold, Anoki spoke again. "Tell me how you came to be lost. Tell me everything. Then we will see what the winter asks of us." So Captain Henry told our story. How we had been part of a larger wagon train heading west. How a blizzard had hit with terrifying speed. How our section of the train, trying to find shelter, had become separated. How our guide had fallen ill with fever and died despite my best efforts to save him. How we had wandered, trying to find either the main train or some landmark we recognized. How the cold had taken 9 of our people, one by one, until we were the 14 who had seen the smoke. Anoki listened without interrupting. When Captain Henry finished, the old man sat in silence for a long moment, his eyes distant as if consulting some internal wisdom. "The main wagon train passed north of here 5 days ago," he finally said. "They believed you were lost, dead. They had memorial prayers and continued west." The words hit us hard. They had given up on us, assumed we were dead, moved on. We were ghosts now, remnants of people who no longer existed in anyone's plans or thoughts. "Can we catch them?" Jacob asked, his voice tight with emotion. Anoki shook his head. "Not in winter. Not through these lands. They are 10 days ahead of you now, maybe more. And the passes to the west will close soon with snow. Anyone traveling now risks being trapped." "So what do we do?" Margaret asked. She wasn't crying, but her hand gripped Ruth's shoulder with desperate strength. "You survive winter here, with us. And in spring, when the passes open, you continue your journey." Anoki looked around at his people who had gathered to hear this discussion. "If you prove worthy of the gift of survival." "Worthy how?" I asked. It was the first time I had spoken, and Anoki's sharp eyes fixed on me. "Who are you?" he asked. "Daniel. I'm a physician." "Ah." Something shifted in Anoki's expression. "A healer. That is good. We will need your skills." He stood, a gesture that clearly signaled the meeting was ending. "Tonight, you sleep. Tomorrow we see if you can learn, if you can work, if you can become part of this place instead of just being visitors who take from it." "We can work," Captain Henry assured him. "All of us. Whatever you need. Good, because winter is long, and no one survives long winter without purpose." Anoki paused at the entrance. "One more thing. We have rules here. Simple rules. You will learn them. You will follow them. Because here, breaking rules doesn't just hurt you. It hurts everyone. Understood?" We all nodded. "Then welcome to our winter home," Anoki said. "May you leave it in spring as better people than you arrived." He left, and we were shown to a smaller building where we could sleep. It was warm, dry, and safe. 3 things we had almost forgotten existed. As I lay down on furs that smelled of smoke and animal and earth, I thought about Anoki's words. "May you leave as better people than you arrived." What did that mean? What would we need to become? I would spend the next 5 months learning the answer. And in learning it, I would discover truths about strength and community, and what it truly means to survive that would change everything I thought I knew about medicine and healing and life itself. But that night, I simply slept. And for the first time in 7 days, I didn't dream of death. Morning came with the sound of activity. I woke to find most of our group already awake, looking uncertain about what to do. Through the doorway, I could see villagers moving with purpose, carrying wood, checking supplies, tending to tasks with practiced efficiency. A young man appeared in our doorway. He was perhaps 25, with an easy smile that made him seem younger. "I'm Dakota," he said in English that had a musical quality to it. "Anoki sent me to teach you the morning routine. Come." We followed him into the cold morning air. The sun was rising, painting the snow pink and gold. Dakota led us through the village, showing us where water was fetched from a stream kept flowing by some method I didn't understand. Where wood was stored, where waste was disposed of far from living areas. How fire was maintained through the night, so it never had to be restarted from scratch. "Everything here has a reason," Dakota explained as we worked. Nothing is random. Our people have lived in this land for generations. We have learned what works and what doesn't. When you understand the reasons, the work makes sense. Young Michael was fascinated by everything, asking questions that Dakota answered with patient good humor. Ruth stayed close to her mother but was watching, absorbing. Old Samuel worked alongside us with quiet competence, and I noticed Dakota watching him with respect. "You know work," Dakota observed to Samuel. "I've known work my whole life," Samuel replied quietly. "Just finally getting to choose it for myself." Dakota nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Then you will fit well here. We value those who work without complaining." After the morning tasks were completed, we gathered again in the large building for a meal of something like porridge, sweetened with what tasted like maple syrup. As we ate, Anoki appeared with several other elders. "Today you begin to learn," he announced. "Each of you will be paired with someone from our village. They will teach you skills, how to dress for this cold, how to move through snow, how to fish through ice, how to preserve food, how to make clothing that keeps you warm, everything you need to survive here." "Why?" Peter asked, his bandaged hands awkward around his bowl. "Why spend time teaching strangers?" Anoki smiled. "Because that is how knowledge survives, by being shared, by being passed on. If we hoard what we know, it dies with us. If we teach, it lives forever." He paused. "Also, you have things to teach us. Your doctor, he has knowledge we can use. Your blacksmith, his skills are valuable. Everyone has something to give. That is what community means." I was paired with the village's healer, a woman named Nuna, who was perhaps 40 years old, with hands that moved with sure, confident grace. She took me to a smaller building that served as something between a medicine lodge and a learning center. "Show me what you know," she said simply, gesturing to supplies she had laid out. Herbs, roots, barks, things I couldn't identify. I explained what I knew of medicine, the theories I had learned in the city, the practices of bleeding and purging that were considered advanced treatment. Nuna listened politely, then gently pointed out that many of my advanced treatments would likely kill patients rather than help them. "The body wants to heal," she explained. "Our job is to help it, not fight it. Here." She held up a root. "This brings down fever. This one eases pain. This bark stops bleeding. Simple, natural. The forest provides what we need if we know where to look." "How do you know what works?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Generations of watching, trying, learning. Sometimes people died from our mistakes, but we remembered those mistakes, didn't repeat them, and slowly, very slowly, we learned." She looked at me seriously. "Your city medicine, it will learn too, but it is young, still making mistakes, still learning. Out here, we don't have time for mistakes, so we use what we know works." It was humbling. I had come west thinking I would bring healing to the frontier. Instead, I was learning that the frontier had its own healing, often more effective than anything I had learned in medical school. What she taught me that first day would save lives later. But more than that, it taught me humility. Taught me that knowledge comes from many sources, and the wisdom to recognize useful knowledge wherever you find it is more valuable than pride in what you already know. Meanwhile, Margaret was learning to tan hides with the village women. Jacob was learning tracking and hunting with Dakota. Peter, despite his injured hands, was working with the village's toolmaker, learning how they crafted implements that could withstand brutal cold. Eleanor was teaching the village children English in exchange for learning their language. Even young Ruth and Michael were being absorbed into the group of village children, learning through play the skills they would need to survive. That night, as we gathered in our sleeping house, we shared what we had learned. There was excitement in the telling, a sense that we were discovering something important. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were learning, growing, becoming something new. But not everyone was adapting easily. Thomas, who had said little since his wife's death, finally spoke. These people, they live so simply, so primitively. Is this what we gave up civilization for? To live like savages? The word hung in the air. Ugly, ignorant. Captain Henry's voice was sharp. Thomas, that word doesn't apply here. These people have survived in conditions that nearly killed us in a week. They have knowledge we desperately need. They're sharing it with us, teaching us, feeding us. They're not savages. They're our teachers. But, no buts. We're guests here. We show respect. We learn what they offer to teach. We contribute what we can. And we're grateful. Henry's voice softened slightly. I know you're hurting. We all are. But don't let grief make you blind to grace when it's offered. Thomas fell silent, but I could see the struggle in his face. He wasn't wrong to feel lost, disoriented by how different this life was from what he had known. But he was wrong to dismiss it. That night, Anoki came to our house and asked if he could tell us a story. We gathered around as he settled near the fire, his old face animated in the flickering light. Long ago, he began, when the world was young, there were two brothers. One believed he was strong because he could kill bears. The other believed he was strong because he could survive winters. The first brother mocked the second, called him weak, said survival was nothing compared to the glory of killing a great beast. Anoki paused, letting the story breathe. Then came a winter like no winter before. Long, cold, cruel. The first brother was strong, yes, but he didn't know how to preserve food, how to stay warm, how to wait patiently for spring. He starved, he froze, he died. The second brother survived, not because he was stronger in body, but because he was wiser in spirit. He knew that true strength isn't about fighting. It's about adapting, about learning, about respecting what you cannot change and working with what you can. He looked around at all of us. You are like the first brother now, strong in some ways, but weak in the ways that matter here. You can learn to be like the second brother, or you can remain proud and probably die when the next hardship comes. The choice is yours. The story settled into us like seeds planted in dark soil. I thought about it as I fell asleep, wondering which brother I had been in my old life, and which brother I wanted to become. The days fell into a pattern. Morning tasks, lessons and work, evening meals together, stories by the fire. Slowly, our ragged group began to transform. We learned to move in the snow without exhausting ourselves, to read the sky for coming weather, to fish through ice holes with patience that would have seemed impossible a month ago, to work together on tasks too large for individuals. Young Michael thrived, his natural curiosity making him a quick learner. Ruth began to smile again, playing with the village children, picking up their language faster than any of us. Eleanor discovered a gift for languages and became an informal translator. Samuel's quiet competence earned him respect from everyone, and I watched as barriers that had existed in our old world simply didn't exist here. Margaret flourished in unexpected ways. The village women taught her not just practical skills, but a kind of confidence I hadn't seen in her before. She had survived her husband's death, kept her daughter alive through conditions that killed stronger men, and now she was discovering she was capable of even more than she had known. And I was learning that healing wasn't just about treating disease. It was about helping people be whole, about community care, about the connection between physical health and spiritual health and the health of relationships. Nuna taught me things that weren't in any medical text. How touch could heal, how listening was medicine, how the healer's role wasn't to fix everything but to support the body's own healing while caring for the spirit that inhabited it. Your medicine tries to control, she told me one day as we prepared remedies. Our medicine tries to support. Both have their place. But in this land, control is an illusion. Better to work with nature than try to dominate it. 3 weeks into our stay, a child fell ill. One of the village children, a girl of perhaps 6, named Isti. She developed a fever and a cough that sounded like death rattling in her small chest. Nuna and I worked together, combining what she knew with what I knew. I had medicine in my bag that could help with infection. She had herbs that could ease breathing and reduce fever. Together, we created treatments neither of us could have managed alone. For 2 days and nights, we took turns sitting with Isti, monitoring her breathing, adjusting treatments, simply being present so she knew she wasn't alone. Margaret and the other village women brought us food. Anoki came by to check on us, his old face worried but trusting. On the 3rd day, the fever broke. Isti's breathing eased. Color returned to her face. She would live. When we finally left her sleeping peacefully with her grateful parents, Nuna turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "Your medicine saved her." "Our medicine saved her," I corrected gently. "Yours and mine together. Neither of us could have done it alone." She nodded, understanding. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't the city doctor bringing civilization to the wilderness anymore. I was a partner in healing, learning as much as I taught, receiving as much as I gave. That night, Anoki called the whole village together, including our group. He announced that Isti would recover, and the celebration that followed was like nothing I had ever experienced. There was singing and dancing, and food brought out from winter stores. Children played. Adults laughed. And for a few hours, the cold and hardship and difficulty of survival faded away, replaced by pure joy at life continuing. I watched Thomas that night, saw him holding young Michael close, saw the way he was beginning to soften, to let go of whatever anger had been poisoning him since his wife's death. Saw him actually smile when one of the village children showed Michael a game they were playing. Anoki noticed me watching and came to stand beside me. "He is healing," the old man observed quietly. "Yes," I agreed, though not from any medicine I gave him. The best healing rarely comes from medicine. It comes from being part of something larger than yourself, from purpose, from connection, from love. He looked at me. "You understand this now, I think." "I'm beginning to," I admitted. "Good, because winter is only half over, and the hardest part is still to come." His words proved prophetic. As we moved deeper into winter, the cold intensified. Storms came more frequently. Food stores began to run lower. The easy abundance of autumn was gone, replaced by the careful rationing of deep winter. This was when the real test began, when the lessons we had learned would be tested, when we would discover if we had truly changed or if we were still just visitors playing at belonging. The storm hit without warning. One moment the sky was clear. The next, wind was howling and snow was falling so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Those of us outside, working, teaching, learning, suddenly found ourselves in a white chaos where every direction looked the same. I heard Dakota's voice cutting through the wind. "Hold hands. Form a chain. Follow my voice." We grabbed whoever was nearest. I felt Margaret's hand grip mine. Felt someone else. Samuel, I thought, grab my other hand. We shuffled through the blinding snow, following Dakota's voice, trusting completely that he knew where he was going. What felt like hours, but was probably only minutes later, we stumbled into the large building. Everyone was accounted for. No one lost, no one injured. We had survived because we had trusted, because we had worked together, because we had learned to follow someone who knew better than we did. As the storm raged outside, Anoki began to teach us songs, simple songs in their language, songs about endurance, about waiting, about the promise that winter always, eventually, ends. We sang together, villagers and newcomers, natives and strangers, people who had been strangers 6 weeks ago but were becoming family now. And as we sang, I understood something profound. This was what survival truly meant. Not just keeping your body alive, but keeping your spirit alive, your humanity, your connection to others. The songs were medicine more powerful than anything in my bag. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of being confined together in close quarters. 3 days of sharing stories and songs and the last of the food. 3 days of learning that true strength isn't about fighting, but about enduring together. When the storm finally broke and we emerged into a world transformed, snow piled twice as high as before, the landscape completely changed, we faced a new crisis. The food was gone, or nearly gone. We had perhaps a week's supply left if we rationed carefully. "We must hunt," Anoki announced. "Now, before the animals burrow too deep for winter." Jacob immediately volunteered, along with several of the village hunters, but Anoki shook his head. "Not just hunters. We all go, even those who have never hunted, because this concerns all of us. Everyone must help. Everyone must contribute." So we went, all of us who could walk. Children stayed with Eleanor and the elders, but everyone else, men and women, experienced hunters and complete novices, formed hunting parties and spread out across the snow. I was in a group led by Dakota, along with Margaret, Peter, and several villagers. Dakota taught us as we walked, how to read the tracks in the snow, how to move silently despite the crunching snow, how to position ourselves so the wind carried our scent away from prey. We walked for hours, seeing nothing but snow and trees and the tracks of animals that had already passed. My legs ached. My lungs burned from the cold air. But I kept moving because everyone else was moving, because giving up wasn't an option, because we needed this. Then Dakota raised his hand. We froze. Ahead, partially hidden by a stand of trees, was a deer. Young, but large enough to feed the village for several days. What happened next happened in slow motion. Dakota signaled to 2 of the village hunters to circle around, signaled to the rest of us to stay still, barely breathing. The hunters moved like shadows, like wind, like nothing at all. And then, with precision that spoke of generations of practice, they made their kill. It was quick, clean. The deer barely suffered. And immediately, Dakota began speaking in his language. words that sounded like gratitude, like apology, like acknowledgement that we took life to preserve life. Always we thank the animal, he explained to us as we helped prepare it for transport back to the village. It gives its life so we can live. This is sacred. This is not sport or entertainment. This is survival with honor. We returned to the village as heroes. The food would stretch our supplies enough to see us through to spring. But more than that, we had succeeded together. Even those of us who had never hunted had contributed, carrying supplies, marking trails, serving as lookouts. We had been part of something larger than ourselves. That night's feast was both celebration and ceremony. Anoki led prayers over the meat, thanking the deer, thanking the hunters, thanking the winter for the test, and the spring for the promise of return. And then he did something that surprised us all. He called Captain Henry forward and presented him with a gift, a knife made from stone, beautifully crafted, clearly valuable. You and your people have proven worthy, Anoki said formally. You came as strangers seeking help. You stayed as students learning. You have become family. This knife is a symbol. You are no longer visitors. You are people of this place. While you remain with us, you belong here. Captain Henry accepted the knife with visible emotion. Thank you, he managed, for everything, for teaching us, for accepting us, for showing us what true community means. You showed us too, Anoki replied. Your doctor's medicine saved Isti. Your blacksmith has repaired tools we thought beyond repair. Your women have shared knowledge and skills we lacked. This has been an exchange, not charity. That is how it should be. As the celebration continued, I found myself sitting beside Nuna, watching the dancing and singing. I don't want to leave, I admitted quietly. When spring comes and we can rejoin civilization, part of me wants to stay here. Then stay, she said simply. Some do. Outsiders who find they fit better here than in the world they left. Not many, but some. Is that allowed? Everything is allowed if it serves the community. If you stay, you would be our healer. We need that. It would be welcomed. She looked at me seriously. But you should think carefully. This life is hard. Beautiful, but hard. And you would be choosing to be separate from your people, your culture, forever. Would I? I challenged gently. Or would I just be choosing a different culture? One that values different things but is no less valid? She smiled. You have learned well, Daniel. You ask the right questions now. Winter deepened further. We passed the solstice, the longest night of the year, with ceremony and song. Anoki told stories about how the sun would return, how spring was a promise the earth always kept, how patience was the greatest virtue in this land. The children, both village children and Ruth and Michael, performed a dance they had learned together. Watching them, seeing how seamlessly they had integrated, I realized something important. Children adapt faster than adults because they don't carry the weight of what should be. They simply accept what is and work with it. Adults could learn from that. Thomas had transformed completely. The angry, grieving man who had called these people savages was gone, replaced by someone humble and teachful. He had apprenticed himself to one of the village's craftsmen, learning to make the tools and implements that survival required. His hands, which had held his dying wife, now created things that gave life. One night, he thanked me for saving him. I was dying inside, he admitted, eaten by grief and anger. This place, these people, they pulled me back, gave me purpose again, gave me a reason to care about tomorrow. They gave all of us that, I replied. Some of us just needed it more obviously than others. As winter slowly began to ease, the days growing imperceptibly longer, the quality of light starting to change, we faced our final test. It was Samuel who first noticed something wrong. He came to Captain Henry one morning with concern on his face. "The meat stores are going bad," he reported. "Something got in. Rats, maybe. Or the cold wasn't consistent. At least a third of what we had left is spoiled." This was disaster. We were still weeks away from when animals would emerge from winter dens, when fishing would become possible again in the streams. The food we had carefully rationed was suddenly much less than we thought. Anoki called a council, village elders and representatives from our group. We sat in the large building and faced the truth. We didn't have enough food for everyone to make it to spring. "What are our options?" Captain Henry asked. Anoki didn't sugarcoat the reality. "We can ration more strictly. Everyone eats less. This will make us weak, but might stretch supplies enough." "Or," Margaret asked, "or some of us leave now. Try to reach other villages. Spread out the burden so no one place has to carry it all." "That's a death sentence," Jacob protested. "The snow is still too deep, the cold too severe. Anyone leaving now—" "Might die," Anoki agreed. "But if we all stay, we might all die, or become so weakened that when spring comes we cannot recover." He looked around at all of us. "This is the choice winter gives us. There are no good options, only less bad ones." The discussion went on for hours. Different people proposed different solutions. We inventoried everything we had multiple times, hoping to find resources we had missed. We talked about hunting again, though Dakota explained that game was nearly impossible to find this deep in winter. It was Eleanor who finally spoke the truth we had all been avoiding. "Some of us are more valuable than others right now. The children must survive. They're the future. The hunters are essential. The healers, the leaders, the rest of us." She paused. "The rest of us are optional." "No one is optional," Captain Henry said firmly. "We're a community. We survive together or not at all." "That's a beautiful sentiment," Eleanor replied gently. "But it's not practical. If we all die because we refuse to make hard choices, we've accomplished nothing. Better that some of us sacrifice so others can live." "This is not your culture," Anoki said quietly. "This is not your decision to make. You do not understand what you are offering." "Then explain it to us," Margaret said. "Help us understand." What Anoki told us then was difficult to hear. In their culture, when food became scarce, the elders would sometimes choose to walk out into the winter. Not because they were forced, but because they chose to ensure younger generations survived. It was considered an honorable death, a final gift to the community. "But we don't ask this of anyone," Anoki emphasized. "We never demand sacrifice, and certainly not from guests, from those we have welcomed into our homes. What if we volunteered?" Eleanor asked. "What if some of us chose?" "Then we would honor that choice," Anoki said slowly. "But we would also grieve it, because every life has value, every person matters, and losing anyone diminishes us all." The meeting ended without resolution, but the question hung over us like the storm clouds that always seem to be gathering on the horizon. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked outside into the cold, needing to think, to process, to understand what the right choice was. I found Nuna already there, standing in the moonlight that reflected off the snow with almost painful brightness. "You're thinking about staying," she said without preamble. "Not just staying through spring, staying forever. How did you know? I see how you look at this place, at the people. You found something here you never had in your old life. I have, I admitted. Purpose, connection, a sense of being part of something larger than myself. But if you stay, someone else might have to leave to make room for you. Your survival might cost someone else's life. Yes. The word was barely a whisper. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, you know what Anoki would say, that the community would decide together, that no one person's life is worth more or less than another, that we find a way for everyone to survive, or we acknowledge we failed. But practically, we ration more. We all get weaker, and we hope spring comes before we become too weak to recover. She looked at me. That's what we'll do, because that's who we are. We don't abandon our people, not visitors, not guests, not even strangers who wandered in from the snow. Once you're here, you're ours to protect. Even if it costs you? Especially then, because that's what community means. Caring for each other, even when, especially when, it's difficult. The next morning, Anoki announced the decision. We would ration more strictly. No one would leave. No one would be sacrificed. We would face spring together, weak but alive, diminished but whole. And somehow, impossibly, we made it work. The days crawled by with aching slowness. We were hungry constantly, weak, irritable, but we shared the hardship equally. The village elders ate the same small portions as everyone else. The children received no special treatment beyond what small extra the adults could squeeze from their own rations. Nuna taught me about plants that could be found even under snow if you knew where to look. Roots and barks that provided some nutrition, though not much. We supplemented our diet with these meager findings, every small contribution helping stretch what little we had. Thomas and the craftsmen made ice fishing more efficient, creating better tools that allowed us to catch fish even in the depth of winter. It wasn't much, but every fish helped. Every contribution mattered. Margaret organized the children, both village children and Ruth and Michael, into foraging parties that searched for anything edible. Pine nuts, seeds, anything the snow had buried. Their small hands and sharp eyes found things adults missed. And slowly, gradually, the days began to lengthen. The quality of light changed. The cold, while still severe, lost its killing edge. Water began to drip from icicles during the warmest part of the day, freezing again at night but proving that change was coming. Spring was approaching. The first sign was a bird, a single robin, too early by weeks, but there nonetheless. Young Michael spotted it and ran through the village shouting, "Spring! Spring is coming!" The adults knew better. It would be weeks still before true spring arrived. But the bird was a promise, a reminder that winter always, eventually, ends. As the weather slowly improved, hunting became possible again. The first successful hunt brought tears to eyes that had been dry through weeks of hardship. Meat. Real meat. Enough to feed everyone properly for the first time in what felt like forever. We celebrated that night with an intensity born of relief and survival. We had made it. Against odds that should have killed us, through hardship that broke stronger people, we had survived. And more than that, we had survived together. No one abandoned, no one sacrificed. Everyone carrying everyone else through the darkest days. Anoki stood to speak, his old voice strong despite the weight he had lost. "This winter has been hard," he said. One of the hardest in living memory. But we survived it. And we survived it because we chose to be family to each other. Because we shared what little we had. Because we refused to give up on anyone. He looked at our group. At Captain Henry and Margaret and Jacob and all of us who had stumbled into this village as desperate strangers. You came to us asking for help. You stayed as students. You leave as brothers and sisters. The winter has tested you. You have proven worthy. You are people of this place now, for as long as you choose to be. Captain Henry stood, his eyes bright with emotion. Thank you, he said simply. For everything. For the food and shelter, yes, but more for the lessons. For teaching us what community really means, what survival really requires. We came west seeking a new life. We found it here in ways we never expected. What will you do now? Anoki asked. Spring is coming. The passes will open. You can rejoin your wagon train's path. Continue west to whatever destination you were seeking. Captain Henry looked at the rest of us, a silent question in his eyes. We had discussed this in quiet conversations over the long winter. Now the decision was upon us. Some of us will continue west, Henry said slowly. Margaret and Ruth want to reach the settlement where Margaret's sister lives. Jacob has family expecting him in California. Thomas wants to start fresh where no one knows his grief. And the others? Anoki asked, though I suspected he already knew the answer. The others would like to stay, if you'll have us. Henry gestured to include me, Samuel, Peter, Anna, Eleanor, and young Michael. We've found something here we don't want to leave. Purpose, community, home. Anoki smiled. Then stay. Build your lives here. Become part of our village not just for a winter, but for all winters to come. We will be richer for your presence. The following weeks were busy with preparation. Those who were leaving needed to be equipped for travel. Supplies were gathered. Routes were planned. Dakota would guide them west to where they could pick up the wagon trail again, and those of us who were staying began the work of truly integrating into the village. Not as guests anymore, but as members. I would be the village's second healer, working alongside Nuna. Samuel would help with construction and the heavy work his strength suited him for. Peter would apply his blacksmith skills to creating tools. Eleanor would continue teaching, both language and other subjects. Anna would work with the women in their various tasks. And young Michael. Michael would grow up as a child of this place, learning both the old ways and bringing new perspectives that would enrich the village. The day came when Margaret and Ruth and the others who were leaving stood ready to go. We gathered to say goodbye, and the emotions were complex. Joy that they would continue their journey. Sadness at the separation. Gratitude for the time we had shared. Ruth clung to Michael, the two children who had bonded through shared trauma and survival. "I'll miss you," she whispered. "I'll miss you too," Michael replied. "But you're going to have adventures. You're going to see California and the ocean and everything we talked about. And you're going to grow up learning to hunt and track and survive in ways I never will," Ruth said, managing a smile through her tears. Margaret embraced me. "Take care of him," she said quietly. "Michael, he's staying because he wants to be like these people, like you, strong in the way that matters." "I will," I promised. "And you take care of yourself and Ruth. Remember what you learned here." "I will," she said. "Always." They left as the sun rose, walking into a landscape still covered in snow but no longer hostile. Dakota led them west, his confident stride assuring us he would see them safely to the wagon trail. We stood watching until they were out of sight. Then we turned back to the village that was now truly our home. The weeks that followed brought more change than I could have imagined. As spring truly arrived, the snow melted, water flowed, green appeared on the landscape like a miracle. Animals emerged from winter dens. Birds returned in flocks that darkened the sky. Life, which had been holding its breath through winter, exploded in abundance, and the village came alive in new ways. Work that had been impossible through winter now demanded attention. Repairs to buildings, planting of gardens, preparations for the year ahead. I worked alongside Nuna, learning about the plants that grew in this region, their medicinal uses, the seasons for harvesting. She taught me with patience and good humor, correcting my mistakes gently, celebrating my successes genuinely. Samuel became one of the most respected men in the village, his quiet competence and humble wisdom earning him a place in the Council of Elders despite his relative youth. The barriers that had defined his life in the world we left behind simply didn't exist here. He was valued for what he contributed, not limited by what he looked like. Young Michael thrived, growing strong and skilled under Dakota's teaching. He was becoming something remarkable, a bridge between cultures, someone who understood both the world he came from and the world he now inhabited. And I found a peace I had never known in my old life. A sense of purpose that came not from treating disease, but from being part of a community that valued health in all its forms, physical, spiritual, communal. One evening, as I sat with Anoki watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, he asked me a question. Do you regret staying? Do you wonder what your life would have been if you had continued west? I thought about it carefully before answering. Sometimes I wonder, but I don't regret. I found what I was looking for here. I just didn't know I was looking for it. What were you looking for? Belonging, purpose, a way to heal that went beyond just treating symptoms to addressing what makes us truly whole. I paused. In the city, I was a physician. A good one, I think. But I was treating diseases without understanding the people who had them. Here, I learned that healing is about relationships, about community, about helping people be whole in every way. Anoki nodded. You understand now what we tried to teach you that first winter. Survival is not just about staying alive. It's about staying human, staying connected, staying purposeful. Yes, I agreed. I understand now. Years passed. The village grew and changed. Children were born. Elders passed peacefully into death, their wisdom passed on to those who came after. Seasons cycled. Winter came and went, each one a test. Each one survived through the same principles of community and cooperation. I became not just a healer, but a leader. My knowledge valued, my counsel sought. I married a woman from the village, Kaya, who taught me to see beauty in things I had overlooked, who challenged me to keep growing even when I thought I had learned all I could. We had children who grew up knowing 2 cultures, speaking 2 languages, understanding that strength comes in many forms, and wisdom from many sources. Samuel lived to an old age, dying peacefully surrounded by people who loved him, having found in this place the freedom and respect he was denied in the world of his birth. His funeral was attended by everyone in the village, testimony to the impact one life can have when lived with integrity and purpose. Michael grew into a leader, his unique perspective, understanding both native ways and pioneer culture. making him invaluable as more settlers passed through the area. He became a bridge, a translator not just of languages, but of values and understanding. And I grew old. My hands became less steady, my eyes less sharp. But my knowledge deepened, my understanding expanded. I trained others to take my place, passing on what Nuna had taught me along with what I had learned in medical school, creating a blend that was richer than either tradition alone. I'm an old man now, sitting on a hillside above the village, watching smoke rise from the buildings below. The same smoke that saved my life all those years ago when I was a desperate, lost stranger wandering through snow that wanted to kill me. Young people come to me for stories, for wisdom, for understanding of how things came to be the way they are. And I tell them about that winter, about the column of smoke we saw before hope died, about the people who took us in and taught us to survive not just in body, but in spirit. Tell us about the before time, a young girl asks me. She's the granddaughter of one of the village children who befriended Michael all those years ago. When you lived in the city, was it better there? Not better, I tell her honestly. Different. Easier in some ways. Warmer buildings, more food, less physical hardship, but harder in others. Lonelier, more isolated, less connected to anything real. Do you miss it? Sometimes I miss things about it, but I wouldn't go back. This is my home. These are my people. This is where I belong. She considers this. Grandfather says you saved many lives with your medicine. I helped heal bodies, I correct gently. But this place, these people, they saved something more important. They saved my soul. They taught me what it means to be truly alive, truly human, truly connected to something larger than myself. The sun is setting now, painting the world in shades of gold and red. Smoke rises from the village, and I can hear the sounds of evening. Children playing, women calling, men laughing, the daily sounds of life continuing. I think about that moment so many years ago when we saw the smoke, when it represented our last hope, when we were strangers stumbling through snow, desperate and dying and lost. We were saved by that smoke, by the people who made it, by the community that took us in and taught us not just to survive, but to thrive. And in turn, we brought gifts to them. New knowledge, new perspectives, new connections that enriched everyone. That's the lesson I try to pass on to the young people who come to me. That survival is never solitary, that we need each other, not just for practical help, but for purpose and meaning and connection. That being willing to learn from others, to admit you don't have all the answers, to accept help graciously, is a form of strength, not weakness. The column of smoke saved our lives that day. But what it represented, community, cooperation, the willingness to share what little you have with strangers, that saved something more precious than our lives. It saved our humanity. And that lesson, passed from generation to generation, shared between cultures, lived out daily in small acts of kindness and care. That's what ensures survival in the deepest sense. Not just making it through winter, but making it through as people who care for each other, who value each other, who understand that we are all connected, all dependent on each other, all responsible for each other. The smoke has long since faded from that day so many years ago. But what it represented burns on. In the lives we've built, in the community we've maintained, in the values we've passed on to those who come after us. Before hope died, the pioneers saw the column of smoke, and in following it, They found not just survival but transformation, not just shelter but home, not just strangers but family. This is my story, our story, the story of what happens when desperate people are met with generosity instead of rejection, when strangers are welcomed instead of turned away, when community is valued over individual comfort. It's a story that continues, carried forward by each generation that learns the lessons we learned in that harsh winter so long ago. The smoke rises, the village lives, the connections endure, and that, in the end, is what survival really means. If this story of transformation and the power of community resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more tales from history's frozen edges. These stories remind us of what we're capable of when we choose connection over isolation, when we open our hearts to those different from us, when we value wisdom from unexpected sources. Thank you for walking this journey with Daniel through the winter that changed everything. May we all find our own column of smoke when we need it most, and may we all be willing to be that smoke for others who are lost in the cold.